The sky over Sicily burned gold that afternoon, July 2nd, 1943, and somewhere in that blinding Mediterranean light, a young pilot from Indiana was about to rewrite everything the enemy believed about race and war. First Lieutenant Charles Hall pressed forward in his cockpit, sweat pooling under his flight suit, engine noise vibrating through his chest like a second heartbeat. Below him, Castelvetrano Airfield stretched across the Sicilian countryside, dust rising from recent bomb impacts. Then he saw it. A Focke-Wulf 190 cutting through the haze, its pilot confident, unaware, believing himself untouchable. Hall dove. The distance collapsed in seconds. His finger found the trigger. Machine gun fire ripped forward, tracer rounds cutting white lines through the air, and suddenly metal was tearing. The German fighter's fuselage splitting open like torn fabric. The 190 rolled, black smoke pouring from its engine, spiraling down toward the earth in a death spin that ended in a plume of fire and dirt. Charles Hall had just done something the Luftwaffe commanders swore was impossible. A black pilot had shot down one of their elite fighters. That swastika he'd paint on the side of his P-40 Warhawk wouldn't be the last. It would be the first of 112 enemy aircraft destroyed by men the Germans would come to call the Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdmen. In the twisted logic of Nazi Germany, black people were classified as Untermenschen, subhuman, incapable of mastering anything more complex than manual labor, let alone the split-second calculations required to win a dogfight at 300 miles per hour. The Nuremberg laws had forbidden Germans from even marrying people of African descent. But high above the Mediterranean that summer, ideology was about to collide head-on with reality. And reality had 992 trained pilots from Tuskegee, Alabama, ready to prove every assumption wrong. What the Luftwaffe didn't know as they climbed to meet American bomber formations in the summer of '43 was that they were about to face some of the most intensely trained, deeply motivated fighter pilots in the entire United States Army Air Forces. These were men who had overcome obstacles their white counterparts would never understand. Men who had trained harder, longer, and with more at stake than anyone else in the sky. They carried more than the weight of national duty. They carried the burden of proving an entire race's worth to a nation that doubted them. The mathematics of aerial combat would soon tell the story in numbers impossible to ignore. 15,000 combat sorties, 1,578 missions, 112 aerial victories, and a bomber escort loss rate that was significantly lower than any white fighter group flying the same missions. These weren't just numbers. They were proof that prejudice was a lie, that capability had no color, and that excellence could emerge from the most unlikely places when given the chance. But the journey to that first kill over Sicily didn't begin in combat. It began in the suffocating environment of American segregation, where the enemy wasn't wearing a swastika, it was wearing a uniform just like theirs. In 1925, the United States Army War College published a report with a title that revealed everything about the military's view of black soldiers: Employment of Negro Manpower in War. The conclusion was brutal and official. Compared to the white man, the report stated, the Negro is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character. This wasn't some fringe opinion scribbled in a notebook. This was official military doctrine, claiming that black soldiers lacked the intelligence for technical roles and the courage for combat leadership. But even as military leaders clung to these poisonous beliefs, a small group of black Americans was already proving them catastrophically wrong. Eugene Bullard had flown combat missions for France in World War I because America wouldn't let him serve in the air. Bessie Coleman earned her pilot's license in France in 1921, when no American flight school would even let her through the door. By the 1930s, the Coffey School of Aeronautics in Chicago had trained dozens of black civilian pilots, each one a living refutation of the lies printed in military reports. Flying skill, it turned out, knew no racial boundaries. The pressure for change intensified as war clouds darkened over Europe. Civil rights leaders like Walter White of the NAACP, labor leader A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William Hastie lobbied relentlessly, hammering the Roosevelt administration with one simple, devastating question: how can America fight for democracy abroad while denying it at home? On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 finally cracked the door open. Just a sliver. Senator Harry Schwartz had inserted an amendment requiring the civilian pilot training program to include schools designated for training Negro air pilots. It was a grudging concession, wrapped in segregation and suspicion. But it was a beginning. When Franklin Roosevelt ran for an unprecedented third term in 1940, he needed black votes in key northern cities. Politics, as always, pushed harder than morality. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. The announcement came with a caveat that revealed exactly what the military expected: failure. This would be an experiment, they said, to test whether blacks could even be trained as combat pilots. The assumption was clear: they couldn't. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. understood the crushing weight of command when he led 26 pilots of the 99th Fighter Squadron to North Africa in April 1943. The son of America's first black general, Davis had endured 4 years of silent treatment at West Point, where no white cadet would speak to him outside of required military duties. 4 years of isolation, 4 years of eating alone, 4 years of walking past cadets who turned their backs. Now he commanded men who carried not just their own hopes, but the dreams of 13 million black Americans watching from home, praying they'd succeed. The 99th arrived at Farjuna, Tunisia, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William Momier, a commander who made no secret of his skepticism about black pilots. Momier assigned them patrol missions over the Mediterranean, keeping them far away from the real action, hoping they'd fail quietly where no one important would notice. He wanted them gone. And when they didn't immediately excel, he thought he had his excuse. The morning of June 2, 1943 marked their first combat mission, an attack on the Italian-held island of Pantelleria. As their worn P-40 Warhawks climbed toward the target, engines roaring, the Mediterranean stretching endlessly below, German fighters suddenly appeared, black crosses stark against the sky. The Tuskegee pilots held formation, protecting their bombers, refusing to break. No aircraft were lost on either side that day, but the Germans had learned their first lesson. These pilots wouldn't panic under fire. But it was July 2nd that changed everything. Charles Hall was flying his 8th mission, escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers attacking Castelvetrano airfield in Sicily. The bombers had just released their payloads, the airfield below erupting in smoke and fire when 2 Focke-Wulf 190s bore down on the formation from above. Hall later testified, his voice steady, reliving the moment. "I saw 2 Focke-Wulfs following the bombers just after the bombs were dropped. I headed for the space between the fighters and bombers and managed to turn inside the Jerry's turn radius. I fired a long burst and saw my tracers penetrate the second aircraft. He was turning left, but suddenly fell off and headed straight into the ground. When Hall landed back at base, the entire airfield erupted. Black ground crews who had endured months of insults and abuse from white personnel finally had their answer to every slur, every doubt, every dismissive comment. Hall's victory was the first aerial kill by a black American pilot in United States military history. The first, but it wouldn't be the last. By January 1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron had been in combat for 7 months. But Colonel Momier had filed a devastating report claiming they lacked aggressiveness and recommending their immediate removal from combat. The report climbed the chain of command until it reached General Henry Hap Arnold, who prepared to shut down the entire experiment. Then came Anzio, On January 27, 1944, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids on Allied forces struggling to hold the Anzio beachhead. 15 pilots of the 99th, flying obsolete P-40s against superior Focke-Wulf 190s, met the German fighters over the battlefield. What followed would silence every critic forever. The 99th shot down multiple enemy aircraft. Sources vary between 8 and 13 kills over 2 brutal days of combat. Captain Charles Hall claimed 2 more victories, bringing his total to 3. In 48 hours, flying inferior equipment, they had destroyed more enemy aircraft than they had in their previous 7 months of combat combined. The War Department launched an immediate study comparing the 99th with other P-40 squadrons and concluded they were performing just as well as any white unit flying the same missions. The success at Anzio proved something undeniable. Black pilots could not only fight, they could excel when given the opportunity and the equipment to do it. In May 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group, combining the 99th, 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons, received orders that would transform them from outcasts to legends. They would join the 15th Air Force as bomber escorts, flying the long, dangerous missions deep into the heart of Nazi Germany, where the flak was thickest and the fighters most aggressive. Colonel Benjamin Davis gathered his pilots at Ramatelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast, the wind cutting across the runway, propellers spinning in the distance. He told them something that would define their entire combat philosophy. We cannot afford to lose bombers. Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home. This directive would separate them from every other fighter group in the war. Stay with the bombers no matter what, no matter how tempting the kill, no matter how easy the victory. In June 1944, General Nathan Twining ordered a systematic marking system for all fighter groups. Each would receive distinctive colors for instant identification in the chaos of combat. The 332nd was assigned red. Not just red noses or red bands, but entire tail sections painted crimson. The P-51 Mustangs with their blood-red tails, red propeller spinners, and red nose bands became instantly recognizable across the European sky. The first bomber crews to receive red tail escorts didn't know their protectors were black. They only knew that these fighters stayed close, never peeling off for easy kills, never abandoning them when things got desperate. Word spread through the bomber groups like wildfire. Request the red tails if you can get them. July 18, 1944, would test the red tails like never before. Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to rendezvous with bombers targeting the Luftwaffe base at Memmingen, Germany, deep in enemy territory. The bombers were late. Davis made a crucial decision that revealed everything about his philosophy. Orbit in enemy airspace rather than return to base and leave the bombers unprotected. When the bombers finally appeared on the horizon, so did the Luftwaffe. Approximately 100 German fighters attacking from multiple directions, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm. The Germans had learned that overwhelming numbers might break the Red Tail's protective screen. The sky became chaos, despite fierce defense by the 332nd, who claimed 11 to 12 victories in the swirling dogfight. 15 B-17s fell to enemy fighters in 20 minutes of savage, brutal combat. The 332nd lost 3 pilots: Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown. Their names would be remembered. Critics seized on the high bomber losses as proof that black pilots couldn't handle major battles. But operational analysis revealed the cold truth. The 332nd had arrived at an impossible situation with massive German forces already engaging the bombers. They hadn't failed. They had prevented complete disaster. By March 1945, the Luftwaffe's conventional fighters could barely challenge Allied air supremacy. The sky belonged to America, but Germany had one last card to play, one final technological ace: The Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, it could outrun any propeller-driven aircraft in existence. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group received its most challenging assignment: escort bombers 1,600 miles round trip to Berlin itself to attack the Daimler-Benz tank factory. Intelligence warned that Me-262s from Jagdgeschwader 7 would defend the target in force. Colonel Davis led 43 P-51 Mustangs into the heart of the Reich, knowing they were about to face something no Allied pilot had ever successfully countered. As they approached Berlin, the jets appeared, the largest jet fighter force ever assembled for a single interception. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown had studied the jets' weaknesses, searching for any advantage. "We knew the German jets were faster than we were," he later explained, his voice calm, remembering the moment. "Instead of going directly after them, we went away from them and then turned into their blind spots." Brown shot down one Me-262, his report clinical and precise. "I pulled up at him in a 15-degree climb and fired 3 long bursts from 2,000 feet at 8 o'clock to him. Almost immediately, the pilot bailed out from about 24,500 feet. Lieutenant Earl Lane performed what many considered impossible, shooting down a Me-262 with a 2,000-yard deflection shot using the new K-14 computing gun sight, threading the needle at speeds that defied human reaction time. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed the third jet victory that day. The destruction of 3 Me-262s in a single engagement represented more jets than most fighter groups would destroy in the entire war. The Red Tails had just exceeded the total of all previous American Me-262 kills in one afternoon, over Berlin, in the heart of enemy territory. The 332nd Fighter Group earned a Distinguished Unit Citation for this mission. Recognition that couldn't be denied, couldn't be minimized, couldn't be explained away. Not all encounters between Tuskegee Airmen and Germans ended in victory. 32 pilots became prisoners of war, and their experiences revealed something complex and disturbing about Nazi ideology and military reality colliding. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson was shot down on August 12, 1944, during his 19th mission. His P-51 took flak over southern France while strafing radar installations, the aircraft shuddering, controls going slack, the ground rising too fast. At his interrogation, the German officer had extensive intelligence about the 332nd Fighter Group, information that was frighteningly detailed. The interrogator had information about Ramitelli Airfield, Jefferson recalled years later, about our squadron commanders, even details about my parents' home in Detroit. He knew my father was a teacher and my mother's maiden name. Their intelligence was frighteningly thorough. Inside Stalag Luft III, Jefferson found himself treated like any other American officer. White POWs from bomber crews often approached him with gratitude for red tail protection, conversations that would have been impossible in segregated America occurring naturally in a German prison camp. The irony wasn't lost on Jefferson, and he spoke about it with a mixture of bitterness and dark humor. "Here I was in a Nazi prison camp, being treated more equally by white Americans than I would be back home. When the war ended and Jefferson returned to the United States, he was immediately segregated at the disembarkation point, back to the reality he'd left behind." While German pilots reportedly acknowledged the Red Tail's skill with the nickname Schwarze Vogelmenschen, many white Americans didn't even know black pilots existed. American bomber crews, however, became their most vocal champions. These men who faced death on every mission over Germany cared nothing about race, only survival, only getting home alive. Bomber crews developed their own mythology about the Red Tails. Stories spread about their distinctive flying style, the way they waggled their wings in greeting, their impossibly tight formations, their refusal to abandon damaged bombers even when the situation looked hopeless. Red Tail Angels became the bomber crew's name for them, a title born from gratitude and respect. The statistics supported the bomber crew's preferences with cold, hard numbers. Research by Air Force historian Dr. Daniel Hallman revealed that bombers under 332nd Fighter Group escort lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters compared to an average of 46 for other P-51 groups in the 15th Air Force. This superior protection rate occurred despite the Red Tails flying some of the longest and most dangerous missions of the war, routes that took them deeper into Germany than almost anyone else. By war's end, the Tuskegee Airmen had compiled a combat record that demolished every pre-war assumption about black military capability, every lie printed in official reports, every whispered doubt. The numbers told a story impossible to deny. 1,578 combat missions flown, 15,000 individual sorties completed, each one a challenge to prejudice, 179 bomber escort missions, 311 missions for the 15th Air Force, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 150 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground, 3 Me-262 jet fighters shot down on March 24, 1945, 950 rail cars, trucks, and motor vehicles destroyed, 254 locomotive engines obliterated. The former Italian destroyer Giuseppe Missouri damaged beyond repair on June 25, 1944. And the number that mattered most to the men they protected: 27 bombers lost to enemy fighters versus 46 average for other groups. A superior protection record maintained across 179 escort missions. Individual achievements emerged from the collective success. Lee Archer, 4 confirmed victories. Joseph Ellsbury, 4 victories, including 3 Focke-Wulf 190s on July 12, 1944. Edward Toppins, 4 victories. Clarence Lester, 3 kills in 1 mission on July 18, 1944. The decorations earned told another story. 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses awarded to 332nd Fighter Group pilots, 744 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts, 3 Distinguished Unit Citations for the 99th Fighter Squadron, 1 Distinguished Unit Citation for the 332nd Fighter Group. But behind every medal was a human cost that couldn't be forgotten. 66 pilots killed in action, 32 pilots captured as prisoners of war, 84 killed in training and non-combat missions. Names, men, lives cut short. The transformation from mockery to respect wasn't just about courage, though courage was there in abundance. It reflected superior American training methods and technological advantages the Red Tails wielded with deadly precision. At Tuskegee, pilots flew more hours than their white counterparts, 300 hours compared to 200 for white pilots. They practiced formation flying obsessively, knowing that in combat, discipline would be their edge, their salvation. The washout rate at Tuskegee was 60% compared to 40% for white cadets. Only the very best survived the program, creating what Colonel Noel Parrish, Tuskegee's commander, called a super-selected group, pilots who had been tested beyond anything their counterparts faced. The progression through aircraft types told its own story of evolution and improvement. The 99th began with hand-me-down P-40 Warhawks, already obsolete when they arrived in North Africa. Liquid-cooled Allison engine fighters inferior to German Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s in almost every performance metric. Yet the Tuskegee pilots used the P-40's superior turning ability and rugged construction to hold their own, extracting every advantage from an inferior machine. The arrival of P-51 Mustangs in July 1944 transformed the Red Tails into equals of any fighter unit in the war. The North American P-51D Mustang represented American industrial perfection, a fighter that could match anything in the sky. Its Packard-built Merlin engine gave it a top speed of 437 miles per hour. Its 650 caliber machine guns could destroy any aircraft with a well-placed burst. Most importantly, its range, over 1,600 miles with drop tanks, allowing it to escort bombers anywhere in the Reich, all the way to Berlin and back. Behind every pilot who shot down a German aircraft stood dozens of support personnel, mechanics, armorers, crew chiefs who kept the red tails flying when parts were scarce and conditions brutal. Of the approximately 16,000 Tuskegee Airmen who served, fewer than 1,000 were pilots. The rest were the unsung heroes who made victory possible. Men whose names rarely appeared in reports, but whose work kept aircraft in the air. The ground crews worked miracles with limited resources, their hands black with oil, working through the night. Ramatelli Airfield in Italy was primitive compared to other American bases, muddy and cold. Spare parts were scarce. The 332nd often last in line for supplies, an afterthought. Yet their aircraft availability rate, the percentage of planes ready for combat, equaled or exceeded that of white units, a testament to skill and determination. These ground crews also faced combat, though they never left the ground. German raids on Ramatelli were rare but deadly. On March 24, 1944, a German bombing raid killed several support personnel, bombs whistling down in the darkness. The men continued working through the attack, pulling aircraft away from burning fuel dumps, refusing to let the mission fail. The strategic bombing campaign over Europe provided the ultimate testing ground for the Tuskegee Airmen, where success was measured not in kills but in lives saved. Each B-17 Flying Fortress cost $238,000 and carried 10 highly trained crew members, men with families waiting at home. The loss of a single bomber represented a strategic setback that rippled through the entire war effort, affecting morale, production schedules, and bombing accuracy. This is why bomber protection mattered more than aerial victories, why discipline mattered more than glory. Colonel Davis understood this when he ordered his pilots to resist the temptation to chase German fighters, to resist the siren call of easy kills. "Anyone can shoot down a fighter if they abandon their post," he said, his voice hard. "It takes discipline to stay with the bombers when the enemy is running." The Red Tails' escort tactics evolved through hard experience and blood. They developed a three-layer defense: close escort, weaving directly above the bombers, medium escort positioned to intercept incoming fighters, and high escort watching for diving attacks from above. This system required precise coordination and absolute discipline, every pilot trusting the others to hold their position. The Tuskegee Airmen fought two wars simultaneously, against fascism abroad and racism at home, and their combat record challenged both Nazi racial ideology and American segregation with equal force, proving that excellence in aerial combat transcended racial categorization. That capability was colorblind. While the Tuskegee Airmen fought Germans over Europe, they battled prejudice in America, a war that felt just as dangerous, just as exhausting. Their victories over the Luftwaffe made headlines in black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, the Baltimore Afro-American, but were often minimized or completely ignored by the mainstream press. Victories erased because they contradicted comfortable lies. The Pittsburgh Courier's Double V campaign, Victory Against Fascism Abroad and Racism at Home, used the Tuskegee Airmen as prime examples of what Black Americans could achieve when given the chance. The contrast with German awareness was stark and revealing. By 1945, the Luftwaffe reportedly knew exactly who flew the red-tailed Mustangs, calling them Schwarze Vogelmenschen with a mixture of respect and disbelief. Meanwhile, many white Americans didn't even know black pilots existed, their achievements buried in classified reports and forgotten press releases. This ignorance was deliberate, maintained through official policy. The War Department rarely publicized the Tuskegee Airmen's successes, afraid of what it might mean for segregation after the war. Victory in Europe brought not celebration, but uncertainty for the Tuskegee Airmen. While white units prepared for victory parades and homecoming ceremonies, the 332nd faced questions about their future in a military that planned to maintain segregation despite combat evidence of its absurdity, its waste, its evil. For decades after World War II, the achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen remained largely unknown to mainstream America, their story buried in archives and aging memories. Individual pilots struggled with this erasure, this silence. Lee Archer, with his 4 confirmed victories, worked as an executive but rarely spoke about his war record, tired of the disbelief. "Nobody believed me anyway," he said with bitter resignation. "A black fighter pilot? Must be lying." In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, integrating the United States military, a decision influenced heavily by the Tuskegee Airmen's combat performance. Proof written in blood and victories that segregation was a strategic weakness. Benjamin Davis, who had led the Red Tails over Berlin, became the Air Force's first black general in 1954, a promotion earned through excellence impossible to deny. Recognition came slowly, grudgingly, decades too late for many. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen, the nation's highest civilian honor. Only 300 of the original pilots survived to attend the ceremony. Many had waited over 60 years for national recognition, for the country they'd fought for to finally acknowledge what they'd done. The transformation from mockery to respect wasn't mythology or exaggeration, but documented fact, recorded in after-action reports and kill confirmations. The numbers remain irrefutable, carved into history. 112 aerial victories against the Luftwaffe. 3 Me-262 jet fighters destroyed in one mission. 150 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground. 27 bombers lost versus 46 average for other groups. 96 distinguished flying crosses earned by 332nd Fighter Group pilots. The nickname Schwarze Vogelmenschen, if the reports are true, proved that prejudice crumbles when confronted with undeniable capability, when ideology meets reality at 400 miles per hour. Every German fighter destroyed, every bomber protected, every mission completed added evidence to an irrefutable case that no amount of propaganda could erase. The color of a pilot's skin had absolutely nothing to do with his ability to fly and fight. Roscoe Brown, who shot down a German jet over Berlin, who faced death and conquered it, summarized their achievement with simple, devastating clarity. "We didn't just fight the Germans," he said. "We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and we won all 3 battles." The Tuskegee Airmen hadn't just won battles, they had changed history itself, altered the course of a nation. They fought 3 wars simultaneously and emerged victorious in all of them, defeating the Luftwaffe in combat, challenging Nazi racial ideology through performance, and eventually helping demolish American segregation through undeniable excellence that couldn't be ignored, couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be forgotten. When given the opportunity, when finally allowed to prove themselves, the Tuskegee Airmen soared, transforming mockery into respect, prejudice into acceptance, and enemies into witnesses of their extraordinary achievement. The sky above Sicily that July afternoon in 1943 had belonged to Charles Hall for just a moment, but that moment echoed across history. A single kill that announced to the world what these men would become, what they already were, among the finest fighter pilots who ever flew. The memories of World War II remind us not only of the price of freedom, but of the strength of the human spirit. Let us preserve their stories so they are never forgotten. Please subscribe to help keep these memories alive.